This is the plan. We're not hiding this. These are the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And he was talking about the forcible removal of the entire Palestinian population of Gaza. Now, ever since Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people began, you've heard me say something along these lines a lot. Why isn't this headline news in the Western media? Why is the Western media failing to cover it either properly or at all? Now, when I say that, there are two purposes. One is rhetorical. I'm fleshing out the outrageous pro-Israel bias of the Western media, which is driven by Israel being a key ally of the West and thus treated as us, as well as shameless, unapologetic, undisguised racism towards the Palestinians who are them. The other is a desperate plea to never ever stop being shocked, that without being naive or ignorant about the power dynamics and context in history, to never ever ever stop screaming inside, I cannot believe this is actually happening. As Israel continues to unleash utter depravity against the Palestinian people in full view of the world, it equally does nothing, zero zilch, to hide its intentions. Let's hear what Netanyahu said in this speech, which received almost no coverage of any significance in the Western media.
הטענה השנייה שאנחנו לא מוכנים לדבר על השלב הסופי, גם זה לא נכון. אנחנו מוכנים, החמאס יניח את נשקו, מנהיגיו יורשו לצאת החוצה, אנחנו נדאג לביטחון הכללי ברצועת עזה, ונאפשר את מימושה של תוכנית טראמפ, תוכנית ההגירה מרצון. זו התוכנית, אנחנו לא מסתירים את זה, מוכנים לדון בזה בכל עת.
To be clear, the use of the term voluntary migration is a disgusting Orwellian affront to language. When you raze an entire land from the face of the earth, damaging or destroying 93% of all homes, when you wipe out its hospitals and slaughter its medics, when you besiege the essentials of life from food to medicine while destroying its agriculture and livestock, when you attack its fresh water supply, when you repeatedly drive the traumatized survivors from place to place to place under threat of violence and death, when you kidnap thousands of innocent people and torture and rape them, when you incessantly rain down missiles and bombs and shoot bullets so that the civilian population there constantly fear it will be their last moment alive, and every day it is the last moment alive of countless civilians. When you do all of this, when you make life completely and utterly unbearable in what is now 542 days of apocalyptic misery, and when you also make it clear there will be no reconstruction or attempt to make Gaza livable again for Palestinians, then the idea of voluntary migration is an obscene, nauseating deceit. And as genocide scholars have pointed out, this proposition is a genocidal act. Genocide means, of course, acts driven with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, religious, or racial group, and the intent here is to erase the Palestinians of Gaza from the earth as if they never existed. You can only do this through the hideous slaughter of the sort we are currently seeing in full display of the world. That by definition includes all the worst crimes imaginable, committed in full view, as I say, of the world, like attacking a convoy of ambulances and civil workers, handcuffing them, executing them by shooting them one by one in the head and the chest, then tossing their bodies into a mass grave, and then even trying to bury their ambulances and fire trucks. This is the latest atrocity the Israeli state has committed, an atrocity that could hardly be more depraved, and as far as the Western media is concerned, this does not qualify as a war crime that can be spelled out accurately for what it is. Let's just begin by listening to Sky News.
Now, the father of a medic, one of 15 people allegedly killed by the Israel Defense Forces, has called for greater international protection for emergency workers in Gaza. The IDF denied that they were deliberately targeting the individuals, saying they opened fire at suspicious vehicles that were travelling without coordination in an active combat zone.
As the British Palestinian writer Hamza Youssef puts it, Sky News just called Israel's massacre of 15 medics an alleged killing. They then uncritically repeated Israel's version and justification as fact. This is deliberate misinformation. Shame on you, Sky News. Let's listen, shall we, as well, to how the BBC reported this.
Yeah, so we've got the UN calling for a full investigation into exactly what happened back on the 23rd of March. That's where these 15 people were killed in Rafah, in the very south of Gaza. And really, this is continuing to generate so much controversy. You have, on the one hand, these allegations that Israel has committed an apparent war crime, a clear breach of international humanitarian law. But the Israeli military, in its latest statement, has been stressing that these were vehicles that it says were acting suspiciously and appeared to pose a direct threat to Israeli forces who were operating in the area.
As the award-winning journalist Richard Sanders put it, classic BBC. Everything that happens in Israel is presented as some sort of hopeless puzzle we'll probably never resolve. This isn't journalism, a case study in why Israel gets away with it. Exactly this. Every time Israel commits an atrocity so obscene and so depraved that the BBC actually has to cover it, although that isn't actually always the case, the BBC then reduces it to a game of he says, she says, along the lines of, in the fog of war, who's to know what the truth really is? Did they play this game with Hamas atrocities on the 7th of October? No, they did not. And as well as rightly accepting crimes that did happen on the 7th of October without any equivocation and describing them, for example, as massacre and terms like that, which they don't use with Israeli atrocities, I would note that on the BBC website, contrary to the corporation's claims that they correct errors when they make them, there are still false claims in their coverage about atrocities which did not happen on the 7th of October. Do they play this game with Russia and Ukraine? No, they don't. They do not treat claims by the Russian authorities as credible or trustworthy. So why do they do this with Israel? Even though it has been proven over and over and over and over and over again that the Israeli authorities lie and lie and lie and lie and lie about the crimes they commit. What the BBC has done all the way through this conflict is protect Israel as it commits in full view of the world, only thanks, of course, to mobile phones and social media, not because of them, heinous atrocities, while its leaders and officials flagrantly just tell us over and over again that they're committing war crimes, as Netanyahu does here, by preserving a narrative along the lines of Israel is fighting a war of self-defense. And let's have a little debate about whether that response is proportionate or not, with both claims being legitimate, which is a bit like treating both sides of an argument about whether the earth is flat as legitimate, with the rather substantial difference that this is about the ongoing mass slaughter of innocent people facilitated by Western governments, including, notably for the BBC, the British government that it is supposed to be holding to account. As the so-called self-described, I should say, as the self-described liberal Zionist academic, Shail Ben Ephraim, who has increasingly, I know, repudiated his support for the Israeli onslaught since it began, writes, however, an IDF source admitted to me that there is evidence that soldiers executed the workers. It is also not IDF practice to bury Palestinian bodies, this source confirmed, suggesting they knew they had something to hide. He says, this confirms that some of the ambulance staff were still alive after the IDF hit them. Then they were murdered. This is a new low for the IDF. Those responsible must face justice. Well, good luck with that one, Shail. Given Israeli soldiers have committed every crime under the sun, whilst in many cases boasting about those crimes in social media without facing any justice, I'm fascinated to see how this one goes. Meanwhile, the Israeli state has ordered the evacuation of Rafah, that is to drive all of the people out, the main city in southern Gaza, where Palestinians had previously been ordered by Israel to flee. Today, Israel bombed a clinic belonging to UNRWA, the UN agency for Palestinian refugees, slaughtering 19 people, including 9 kids. Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, has announced that Israel will capture extensive territory that will be added to the State of Israel security areas. In other words, Israel is openly committing to annexing more and more of Gaza, a wantonly illegal act. Again, not reported as such in the Western media. All of this is in the service of the plan, I call it a plan, this genocidal plan, announced in the Financial Times to drive the surviving population of Gaza, already a tiny strip of land, no bigger than East London, into an even tinier swathe of it, all with the intent of removing the population from Gaza altogether, as Netanyahu has made very clear. Indeed, Israel has imposed a total siege on Gaza now for over a month. Nothing is allowed to get in. And at the same time, they've systematically destroyed agriculture, livestock, food production. Yesterday, the World Food Programme announced that all 25 of its bakeries have now closed in Gaza because of a lack of fuel and flour. Hot meals, they say, are continuing, but supplies will last 2 weeks maximum, and its last food parcels will be distributed in the next 2 days. What does that mean? It means Palestinians can't eat, and it means Palestinians are going to starve to death. Deliberately starving an entire people is an unambiguous, straightforward crime, yet where is the coverage reflecting this obvious fact? The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for this very crime. Why isn't that integrated into Western media coverage of what's currently going on as standard, just as Hamas-run health military has been a default addition to their style guide? As Israel's leaders commit these shameless crimes in full view of the world, one of the Western politicians in governments which continue to arm and facilitate these heinous atrocities. Let's listen to this from the Labour Cabinet Minister, Bridget Phillipson.
Just get your take on that breaking news very quickly that we had before that package, that Israel's Defence Minister, Israel Katz, is saying his country's military operation in the Gaza Strip is expanding to capture large areas. What's your view on that?
I'm hearing this for the first time. As you present that to me, I'd want to look carefully at exactly what is being said here. I think what we all want to see in the long term is, of course, an end to the conflict, moving towards a two-state solution. And, of course, we know we're in the position where there are many hostages that are still in captivity, and alongside that, the need for humanitarian aid to continue to get into Gaza. And we'll look carefully at what emerges as a government.
Embarrassing, pathetic, morally bankrupt. Even if it wasn't the first time she heard those words, she would have refused to condemn this straightforward war crime as what it is. And she knows it. If this was a similar statement she'd just been told about on air from the Russian authorities, would Bridget Phillipson say, "Oh, sorry, I couldn't possibly comment. I need to look into the details further"? No, she wouldn't. And she knows it. She would just denounce Russia's war crimes. And here's a really important point that he's emphasising. In British politics, the two-state solution exists solely as a crutch to get British ministers through an interview, so they don't have to denounce or even address Israeli war crimes. They know the Israeli state has less than zero intention of accepting any form of Palestinian state, and Labour itself hasn't even committed officially to a Palestinian state. They know that unless there is massive pressure on Israel, arms embargo, sanctions, the whole works from Western governments, then Israel is never going to accept any form of Palestinian state and will keep committing the crimes that the Labour government not only refuses to denounce but keeps facilitating with British weapons. She might as well say, we all want a rainbow made of cupcakes in which golden ballerina fairies dance and sing for peace and love. The two-state solution is just a rhetorical deflection for British ministers, an attempt to wriggle out of having to say anything meaningful or substantial. And if we had journalists who did their job, they'd know that and they'd pin them down. But alas, the Western media is full of journalists who've quite literally allowed Israel to get away with industrialised murder. A crime more evidence than any other crime in history as it actually happened. A crime more confessed to than any other crime in history as it actually happened. And yet the Western media continues to protect Israel from its criminal culpability. It's up to us to make sure they don't get away with it. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us as we expand our challenge to the pro-genocidal media at patreon.com/owenjones84. Share the video, get the message out. Speak to you in a bit.